Welcome back, everyone. I really am amazed how disciplined you are. I swear to God, I've never, ever seen a group so disciplined. Thank you. You really make the life of everybody in the Secretariat much easier. So welcome back. I hope you had a refreshing lunch. I hope you also got a chance to walk out and get some fresh air. This afternoon's panel discussion is going to be on impactful visualization or data distortion. Now, in an era where the average attention span seems not to exceed 140 characters, and it depends where this 140 characters is coming from, and in an era where to make our messages travel widely and in a timely manner, it needs to be contextualized. And if it is contextualized visually or in a graphic manner, then it can travel better. Where visualization representation of reality are disputed, even if you see a picture, they dispute that picture, and those pictures are also challenged. We're at the same time in an era where people are craving for patterns and connections to tell a story. We may be blessed or cursed to resort to a discipline which goes back to the 17th century. And that discipline is data visualization. Back in the 17th century, perhaps the earliest form of data visualization were maps. For those of you who have visited the Vatican Museum and have walked down the aisle, the map gallery, you probably have stood there in awe looking at the precision of a map and then turned your head to look at another map and chuckled as to how distorted that map is. So this afternoon we're going to be talking exactly about that. Let's say the good side of data visualization and the distortion of data visualization. And in a way it just shows us that perhaps in the 17th century we haven't made a lot of progress. If still the maps can show the reality, and then there's something else which shows the distortion. So I'm going to jump right in, and I'm going to ask Jan Tulp, who's the data experience designer at Tulp Interactive. Jan has been in this space for quite some time. So Jan, if you could just share an example with us as to how you have been able to bring data to life and how this has helped influence decision-making at policy level.
Yeah, sure. Let me explain it by the slides that I have prepared. First, I would like to mention that there are two major types of visualizations. The first one is explanatory visualization, and the other one is exploratory visualizations. And with explanatory visualizations, you already know what the insights in the data are, and you create the visualization to communicate the insights. And usually it's used to create awareness or to inform people, or maybe even entertain people. The other one is exploratory visualization, and those are the types of visualizations that are used to discover insights. And usually those are the interactive tools, and they need to be very interactive because you want to be able to look at a data set from different perspectives. This is a project of my own, and this is an example of how a visualization can really show some insight that you may not expect. This is a project I did for the city of The Hague, where I live, in the Netherlands, and in this city, you can call the local government if there's something wrong in your street or something is broken, like a street light is broken. And they collect this data, and then they send out people to fix the problem. And at the time when they approached me, they never looked inside this data set themselves. So they were completely unaware of any trends or patterns in geographical patterns or something like that. So the people that contacted me wanted to publish this data set as open data, anonymized, of course, but and use this visualization as some kind of showcase to see what's possible with open data. And I created this visualization, and my direct contacts were very excited about it. But unfortunately, their managers were not, because in this visualization, you can also see how much time it takes for the local government to solve the issues. And even though they were doing a pretty good job, most of the issues were solved within 1 or 2 days. Some of them took more than 2 weeks. And at the same time, you can, in this visualization, you can filter down to specific types of problems. And you saw that some areas had only one specific type and other areas did not. And so their managers were actually afraid of negative publicity. So in the end, this visualization was not published. So yeah, maybe this visualization was a little bit too successful in that sense. But anyway, it really did show some insight. And to answer your question with this visualization a little bit, it was used internally for some time afterwards to improve their own process and to polish it. I've a few more things I would like to show.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is another project I did, and this is a part of an animation I created for Nature magazine. And Nature is, of course, a scientific magazine that publishes research. And what they want to do is they want to communicate science to a broader audience. And one way of doing that is to use data visualization. So this was part of a research that has been done where the researchers try to create a more accurate estimate of the total number of trees in the world. And before that, they only used satellite images, but for this research, they also used or asked people all around the world to actually count trees, so that they knew much better that if you see this type of vegetation on a satellite image, it means that we have this many trees. And so it turns out that we have 8 times as more trees as was previously expected. That we're losing 10 million trees a year, so it's still not very good news. But anyway, this visualization is really used to present information and to engage people with the subject. And it's really not meant to do some solid decision making, but really to inform people and to engage them. There's another example. And this ended up in a research paper of French researchers, and this was an example where the researchers worked in a hospital, and they were interested in the spreading of disease inside the hospital. And this visualization shows a network of the different people that were infected. And well, you can imagine that originally they had in their paper just the standard bar charts and line chart, but that didn't communicate their message clear enough. So they asked me to create this visualization for their paper. So finally, I would like to mention this, that I hope that this is the one takeaway from my part, at least, is that every visualization contains or is based on design decisions. And that's not whether it's a good decision or a bad decision, but it's a decision, and each decision has an influence. So in this animation, you see a map I came across just this week, and just by determining how many colors you use, what is the size of the bins, how do you determine the size of the bins, what method do you use, it can really change the appearance of the map. So every visualization involves design decisions, and whether it's good or bad or intentionally good or bad, that's another discussion perhaps, but every visualization contains these decisions.
Thank you, Jan. And you gave me a very good lead to ask Elisabetta Carfagna, who's the full professor of statistics at University of Bologna. And I want to ask Elisabetta if she can talk about data distortion and how, you know, if you were to use the same data set, you can actually tell 2 different stories.
That's true, indeed. Well, first of all, giving a graphical representation of data is essential because what you can see remains in your mind. If I have just a table and I try to communicate the data, the meaning of the data, the pattern, through just a table, nobody will remember that. It will pass away. If you look at this graph, you can see a pattern, you can see a trend. In this case, I'm taking into consideration a time series of oil closing prices in a period from January 2011 to May 2017. And the pattern, as you can see, shows a decrease of the prices. But what would you say? Is it a huge decrease or not? I'm not going to wait for an answer because I want to show you another graph. Look at this. This is another pattern. You can see another trend. You can see a very strong decrease of the prices. Well, indeed, look at the period and look at the meaning. They are exactly the same data. They are exactly the same data. So what's the truth? Let's go back to the previous one. Well, in this case, maybe you can be a member of government of an importing oil country who is going to show that the prices of the oil are decreasing, but not that much. This means that we still have many problems from the point of view of our economy. If you are a member of government of an exporting country, you can see exactly the opposite. The prices are too low. They have decreased so much, and we have to do something about in order to make the crisis not to increase more. What can we do about that? Well, which is the right graph? Which is the correct graph? We have two different perspectives. And according to the different perspectives, we can show two different trends. Is there a correct trend and a wrong trend, a correct graph and a wrong graph? No, they are both correct. They are both correct. So, on one side, the graph is essential. On the other side, look at it carefully, because as Jan said, there is a design behind the graph.
Thank you, Elisabetta. Now, as a communicator, I've always been intrigued as to how you guys managed to communicate the uncertainty of a forecast and the accuracy of an estimate.
Yeah, this is another, I think, very relevant topic. As a statistician, we are discussing so much about the communication, not only of data, but also of the accuracy of the data. How reliable are the statistics we are producing? Generally, people don't care at all about the coefficient of variation of some estimates because they don't even know what the coefficient of variation is. But what can we do about that? Should we communicate to ordinary people what a coefficient of variation is? How can we do that? Maybe a graph can help. So let's try to figure out how to communicate the basic idea of reliability of the statistics that we are producing, how reliable they are through a graph. So some attempts have been done in this field, and here you can see in this graph an uncertainty description, an uncertainty graph. It's an uncertainty cone. In this case, we are looking at a graph that was created by NOAA in order to communicate the level of uncertainty of the forecast they were doing concerning a specific season of hurricanes. What do you think people understood from this graph? Ordinary people understood that the hurricane was going to increase. The hurricane itself, and not the uncertainty concerning the forecast for the next days. So, in principle, the idea of showing this cone of uncertainty was excellent because it was a very powerful way for showing something, some data which cannot be really understood. On the other side, finally, NOAA realized that it was extremely misleading because people were so scared. They were saying, oh God, the hurricane is increasing. Yeah, we have to do something about that. So, graphs are essential, crucial, but very delicate to manage. And still, as a statistician, we don't know exactly how to communicate some difficult ideas, difficult concepts, which are accuracy of estimates, uncertainty, of course, forecasts.
Thank you. I think we'll come back to that because I'm still not sure I know as a communicator how I can convey that. So we'll probably come back to that. I want to go to Benoit. Benoit Thierry, he is our very own Benoit Thierry, who is a country program manager at IFAD. Now, Benoit has this knack for IT. Ever since I've known him, he's been in the IT space, and he has done a lot of great work at IFAD. But what I want to ask him is that if he can share with us a concrete example of how you have used data visualization to bring about change at national level within the investment programs of IFAD.
Thank you, Roxy, and good afternoon. Indeed, in our work, it's quite specific because we manage projects in countries, and these projects are integrated in country programs, which are integrated in government framework or IFAD framework. So just to say that we have a multiplicity of stakeholders and partners. And it's one key point also when you discuss data, is for all of them to agree and discuss these points. The second aspect is that we are in a field working with very poor farmers, small farmers, where unfortunately there is not many data. National statistics do not reflect always these sectors, these people. And most of these data are produced by the project by themselves through surveys or work. So we try to help our project team to gather all these survey results together and produce enough documentation which can be then shared at higher level. You know, one key aspect of IFAD projects is to do pilots. We pilot new techniques, new technology with farmers through public service. And if it's working, then government can scale it up in their national programs with national budgets. So by putting some of these documents together, like we show here, you see on the right side there are infographics about projects, or on the left side you have a program, country program review. We can manage to aggregate all the data which are collected during projects. So this is not very high-tech, it's mostly analytical work, but that's a key element I always see. If we want a culture of data with our partners with these projects, it's also to push people to do analysis. So when I will show you the system in a minute, we always put, some key reports or graphics so people don't just enter data, but also make the analysis. So in these two cases, like Laos, for example, we were co-chairing with Ministry of Agriculture the technical work for agriculture. And through that way, we managed to bring many examples from the field and from all type of partners, NGOs, bilateral agency or multilateral, which can then feed into the policy dialogue. And there was a dedicated unit in the ministry which was then scaling up these policies. Here on this slide, we show some of the tools. Like we use a lot of maps, it was clearly said, both by Jan and Elisabetta. I mean, maps are a very strong tool, very powerful to discuss with policymakers, because with few images you can really show a good analysis of data. What we try is to have both qualitative, which are the two bottom maps, or quantitative on the left side. And you will see that it's a mix of GIS, but also on data with some graphics. And this is indeed largely used. I'm impressed when it's done. I see project team using them not only at national level ministries, but they print it, very large, and they put in all their exhibitions up down to village level, actually. So that's quite interesting.
Great, but Benoit, can you just also share with us, how did you manage to equip the beneficiaries and the government officials to unpack this data and use it?
Yeah, that's a key aspect, because as our projects are quite complex, we have to link national policies, orientation with field reality, the life of the farmers, what they do on a daily basis, planting, harvesting or not harvesting, etc., etc. So that makes it very complex. And one of the key questions I always ask is, how do you represent socio-economic development in terms of data visualization? It's a quite tough question, and that's why we encourage, again, this culture of data analysis. So on one hand, we have this complexity, difficult to manage, because how do you know what was all the production of bananas in that part of Cambodia, how much vegetable are crossing the border from Vietnam to Cambodia, where most of it was smuggled, you know. So it's very difficult, and you have to get various levels of analysis from government at borders, but from market as well, when you see the wholesale market what is sold, and from the farmer production. And the matching of data, etc., is quite important as well. So we encourage a lot project teams to collect data through actually more and more this tablet system that you have seen during these workshops. No, many people are using it. So we have several apps on these tablets. It's now a kind of full ecosystem, because there are apps which follow the markets only, like prices, traditional. Some others are following credits as well, the credits we are giving to small farmers. And some are also monitoring farmers' family in their cycle of production. So that helps to give basic data. And then we link that to these slides you can see here, which is a log frame database. So the same, what is the common tool to all these governments, institutions, projects? It's the logical framework. That's the only common, common tools I found among them. And this is where we found that, okay, let's do an application around this so that we can be multi-client, Instead of, as it is, each institution wants a separate report with their own requirements. We have now a full database where everybody can find what he wants. So we started with this log frame. So the data from tablets, there are 200 in the field now. That's for Cambodia, in each province, district, communes. Then they fill the data offline or online, come back to office, connect to Wi-Fi 3G, and it's sent to an online database where at the Ministry of Agriculture, they can now validate the data, check them, and also produce reports. But what we insisted was to have already in the tablet some analytical tool to avoid that bias that people just enter data, don't check, don't report. We say, no, if you plan a project, you're able to implement. If you're able to implement, then you should be able to monitor, analyze your work. So that's what we are pushing slowly into that system. So at the end, it's working quite well. It still needs to be improved. But overall, I would say in conclusion that, our three challenges were really that. How to represent socio-economic development, progress, how to build a culture of data analysis, and how to link all the various layers of that reality, from the farmers to the government, to international institutions, etc.
Thank you. I think you gave a very realistic picture of your challenges, and I'll be interested to find out maybe later, how are you planning to scale up this activity that you have in Cambodia, perhaps in other places. But let's now go to the floor to see, so that you can pose your questions to our panelists. Yes, don't all do it at the same time. Then I can't see who's raising their hands. Yes, Michael.
Thank you for bringing up some very interesting issues. I wanted to ask how you address the cultural dimensions of representing data. For example, I found it of using things like a log frame or any chart, which in a lot of the Western countries you go from left to right. In Asia you often go from right to left. So if different people look at a chart or a graph, they can interpret it very differently in terms of the framework they have. Some people like to go from top to bottom, and so I just wonder how you address these issues, including of using different kinds of images and graphical symbols which go well in one culture but which may not go so well in another. So.
Thank you for that. Let's take 2 more, and then we come to the panel. Sir?
Yeah, hello. On the question of visualizations, I'd like to ask, it seems like there may be some principles that guide an agnostic approach to presentation of data versus an approach that's designed to achieve a certain aim. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how to do that, because I would love to be able to give guidance to those I work with, to sort of take your emotions and your desire maybe to present a certain opinion out of the data and take a more agnostic and a more neutral approach to presentation that's more designed to display information rather than do the interpretation for the audience themselves. I don't know if you can help with that a little bit.
Thank you. Chitra?
One question for Benoit, whether you've used any of your materials, your visualizations to feed back to the farmers, the data you've collected, and if you have, what your experience was. And then for Jan, I was wondering, I often have found that we have infographics that are produced more by graphic artists as opposed to data visualizers, and sort of and often the data is inaccurate, I find. It's more of a beautiful pictures depicting what they would like you to see. So any advice, and again, how do we handle data so it's data being visualized and not creating images or marketing?
Thank you. Okay, so let's come to the panel, and then we'll go back to the floor. Elisabetta, why don't you take the cultural dimension of images and graphics?
Indeed, I didn't think so much about that, in the sense that generally we use very simple graphs, and like the one I just showed, this very simple graph, and it's just a representation of the Euclidean distances, and it's more or less the same all over the world. So this is not a big issue. I think we should take into consideration the different kinds of public we are trying to communicate to. Because if we are talking to politicians or to policymakers in general, well, the situation is quite different with respect to the case in which our target is ordinary people. And the target is different also if we are thinking of impact evaluators, which have some technical knowledge about what they are going to evaluate. So the cultural problem is much more relevant when your target is ordinary people, of course, because in this case it's clear that you can have a very strong misunderstanding. The case I show with uncertainty is clear. No? It's a problem of misunderstanding, and can be misunderstanding can be even more important in case you have some cultural device, because you are using a representation that is very common in Western countries and is not in some other kinds of countries and in another kind of culture. So when the target is ordinary people, yeah, that's true. We have to take into consideration these aspects.
But how does this complicate then the work of the evaluator?
Yeah, for sure this is a complication, because you have to deal with different cultural aspects and try to figure out how the graph is more appropriate for a specific country. But this is not the only problem you have. Indeed, maybe it's not the main problem you have. You already have many other problems, which are the ones we mentioned before. And you were talking about the maps, no? The maps were made according to a specific kind of projection, no, in the 17th century. But now it's the same. Now it's the same. It depends on the kind of projection you use. According to some projections, Africa is huge. It's just a matter of projection. So what should we think? That there's no reality, there's no truth. This is not what I'm saying, absolutely not. What I'm saying is that when we look at a graph, we have to try to go beyond the graph and try to look at which is the scale, how it's created, because all these aspects strongly influence the impression you can have of the graph. If we go back to the two different graphs that I showed, I simply played with the scale, nothing else. I did not change the data. They are the same, and the two different graphs are both correct. This is important. They are both correct. So after having given a look at the graph, try to understand what is behind the graph, which are the data behind the graph.
Okay. Jan, anything from you on the cultural aspect?
Well, I don't have much experience with different cultures yet, but I would agree with you that the end user or the people you're designing your visualization for is always very important. One other thing, for instance, is 10% of the men are colorblind, so you have to make sure that that you choose colors that people can distinguish. Logarithmic scales, as you mentioned, I've done quite a few projects for Scientific American, and even though their audience is generally well-educated audience, we usually don't use logarithmic scales because it still turns out that it's harder for people to understand. So. And also, for me, if I design a visualization for management who just want to look at it and then move on, or if I create it for an expert user who's going to work on a daily basis and who knows what it's about, you just make different design decisions. So in general, I would say that it's really important to be aware of the people you are designing your visualization for.
Right, that's like music to a communicator's ears. Know your audience. So, Benoit, you've worked in a number of continents. So for you, this culture issue, it was something that you probably hit your head against the wall. How did you go about addressing it?
Yeah, it's true that we have to adapt to each and every place, and we always find solutions. This is what I like. You always find good solutions. On the log frame, first, maybe I come back on that. I would be happy, that we can find solution. It's a very challenging question, and I think here, if everybody can collaborate to have nice log frame representation, it will help. In Africa, I was using mostly pyramids, very simple. But now in Southeast Asia, I'm thinking more of a lotus flower, Lotus flower is closed, then it's suddenly open. You can go down to your output and outcome. So we have few ideas. But indeed, so we adapt to each place, and including in terms of technology. So it's mostly connected people versus non-connected. So remember, we had a very wide range of tools for non-connected place, which have proven their efficiency, and for literate or non-literate people as well in the field, and that are still of huge value. You can use that on a regular basis. Now, even with these tablets again, it's really funny what you can do, because like here we have a collection of video inside, which each extension worker is having. So when they go in one place, they can make a short video about the chicken raising in one place, and then share it with the others who will show in other places. So it really replaced the old system of cinema in the village, but that's quite useful. And now, I don't know if we can come back to the slide. I was having the last one, and one more, I think. There is one missing. Yes, okay. Here, what we always do is to be as much multimedia as we can, because we know that not everybody will look at the same site or the same online tool. And that's why here you can see on the left Facebook groups, which in Asia are working incredibly well. Each of the projects having a work group like that, there are thousands of people on it. This one is 10,000 people. Then, of course, each project is having websites for repository. And here again, I like your support in finding a solution, because Facebook is wonderful on a day-to-day basis. 2 days after, you forgot what was there. It's present, yet you have to dig to get. How could this be transferred on a website for a repository for the institutional memory of a project? That's something we are confronted, which is quite interesting. Again, like we have a lot of livelihood groups, which are solidarity groups, farmers. So they collect good experience in vegetable, for example, or in chicken raising. They post their picture on Facebook a lot, they share. How can we then gather that in one place? That's an interesting topic. And then we have this IFAD Asia portal on the top right. And this portal is gathering data from 20 countries in Asia Pacific. And that was a system which we had in IFAD starting in Latin America 20 years ago, spread to Africa with Feed Afrique, and then to Asia with IFAD Asia. So it's by using a wide variety of tools from the same data, from the same topic, that we ensure the best dissemination.
Great. Now coming to the neutrality approach. So how do you, when you're doing your data visualization, how do you actually embed a neutral outlook to your data without taking sides? Jan?
That's a good question. Well, there is, well, first of all, I think, just like was said before, you can create multiple representations of the same data. So, there's always, well, some choices involved. On the other hand, there's, for instance, Edward Tufte started with this, the data ink ratio is what he called it. It's how much amount of the ink when it's on paper or pixels when it's on screen is used to actually represent your data or is used to for decoration or additional elements. So if you have a simple chart with a border around it and all kinds of elements that are not really contributing to or are represented, visual representation of the data, then you may remove that. So one guideline could be to remove as much as possible of your visualization that is not really a representation of your data, so that you only keep the essence of your visualization. That could be one thing. The other thing is that usually you want to make something stand out, and that is then a situation where you want to emphasize something, but it's really good to make all the rest kind of look the same and really make the thing you want to communicate visually stand out as well. So make that a bright color or something like that. So it's not a lot of things going on, but that it becomes clear to see that this is all background or contextual information, and this is the thing that is emphasized.
Okay, I guess that in a way talks to what Chitra was asking, that when the data visualization is done by graphic designers, then it may misrepresent the data visualization, the data itself, although I personally disagree with Chitra, but I would like to hear from you guys. What is your take on that? And then in responding to that, you can also talk about the neutrality.
Well, the more a graph is nice to see with many different colors and so on, the more it's able to attract the attention of the audience, so the better it is. But the more it's nice, the more it's difficult to understand what is behind. The more it's difficult to understand which is really the trend, which are the data behind the graph. So I think that we should not take into consideration only something that is very attractive, because this is exactly what it can be more misleading. So maybe in order not to give a too biased impression, it's better not to complicate too much a graph and not to make it extremely beautiful, but just to be as close as possible to the data themselves. But it's a trade-off, I would say. It's a trade-off between doing something very nice, very attractive, very, very promising from the point of view of the capacity of communicating specific concepts, and being able to give a clear idea of the data behind the graph.
But what if you want to raise awareness? So I guess where you're coming from is if you're talking to your peers, right? So yes, the graph doesn't need to be visually too attractive, because anybody looking at it can figure out, the graph. But if you're talking to somebody who's not your peer, you still need to make it attractive so that they actually do spend the time looking at it and yet you have to find that balance. So
Yeah.
how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, that's the reason why I said it's a trade-off between having a clear representation and an attractive representation at the meantime, because you risk to have the possibility to show whatever you like. And this is not exactly what we want to do, no?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah,
sorry,
go ahead.
may I introduce another topic? And it's the following. Indeed, not only how to represent, but also what to represent. Because in many cases, what happens is that we simply represent the average or a total. An average or a total. This is what we show. This is what we think is important. And there are two other elements. The first one is the one I was talking about before, that is how accurate is the estimate. I'm talking about estimates now. How accurate is the estimate that you are producing? And how can you give the idea of the, let's say, reliability of the estimates you are producing, just to use a word that is not too technical. How can you show this important aspect? And also, in some cases, many people don't believe in the kind of representation you are doing exactly because you are representing means and totals, and their personal experience is different from that. So they say, no, this is a datum that has been produced by somebody who knows nothing about reality, because I know how things are going, because according to my experience, the situation is completely different. So should we also represent the outliers graphically? Maybe yes, maybe not, because if we just show a mean and the outliers, people can be attracted by outliers and give the outliers the same importance you give to the mean. And this can be extremely misleading. So what should we represent? Not really the outliers, but maybe at least the distribution of the mean. But again, how to represent the distribution of the mean? We have already seen many problems just with the uncertainty cone. No? How can we represent the distribution? And how can we give an idea? In this case, I'm thinking of ordinary people. How can we give an idea to ordinary people of what the distribution of an estimator is? And on the other side, going back to the idea of reliability of the estimates, if we say that these data are reliable, we implicitly say that they are not certain. So they are accurate means they include an error. So in the end, people can start thinking that what you are producing is not certain. And so which is the difference between what you are producing and somebody else with maybe no experience and no specific knowledge is producing? So is it better to explain also the level of reliability? Or it's better not even to talk about that? I'm asking questions more than giving answers, but I think this is a good place for discussing about these issues.
Sure. Benoit.
Yeah, I think a good illustration on that also is like in our world, the whole debate between small farmers and big farmers, and everybody fight what is the best and out. I think data analysis could bring a lot also in a sector like this, providing that we would be able to cross-analyze the big data at international, national level with the very micro data at farmer level. And this is where we are missing information. Because I guess you are like us in our projects. To get this data at family level, it's only through surveys, very limited, that is, we are acting. So how could we improve that? Because when we do our own analysis and go in some literature, it's quite impressive what's happening on small farming, Not only that small farmers can produce yields which are impressive. If you take vegetables or any, they produce 10, 15, 20 tons per hectare, which is huge compared to big farm. But you have entire regions in the world which build their wealth on small farmings. Okay, I'm working on Asia these days, and I can see we are surrounded by countries who did that. Vietnam, Thailand, China, 400 million farms, And in the past, 50 years ago, Japan, Korea were all built based on small farming. And what's amazing, even if they make more of the money out of industry, etc., it started with small farmers, when 70% of the population was still in rural areas. Because indeed there was no other job. So at that time it was better to value the job in the field, in the small farms, and then develop the industry in parallel. So these are all lessons that we know, but which are not promoted enough, and probably also for lack of analysis of this data. And the debate can be fierce nowadays in some countries where, because of the international news, etc., you may have policymakers which are more impressed by big farms or big concessions, whereas the majority of the population is of small farmers. So here it would bring us a lot for policy dialogue if you can all help us in this task to get more analytical data on small farmers.
And to respond to Chitra's question, have you ever given back this visualization to the beneficiaries?
So yeah, I mean, it happens on a regular basis. So of course we adapt it to that. So like maps, when I present it to minister, which is a national map, at local level we present the map of a commune, of a district. You know, there were all this system of PRA, participatory rural appraisal, where you produce also this village map. But what would be also useful is to continue the effort through the years, when the effort is completely integrated. In Cambodia, you have an interesting process at commune level where they do their own planning, and then in this case, you can keep using the same tools year after year.
Okay, yes, yeah.
Can I thought of one more example of a kind of objective visualization. A friend of mine who also works in visualization, he gave a workshop once, and he got a question from the audience, and the question was, is there a perfect way to represent a data set? And he thought, well, let's try this out, and let's do a small exercise. So he came up with an exercise, and he created the smallest data set possible, just 2 numbers. And if there should be one perfect way to represent the data set, then you should have a perfect way to represent 2 numbers. So he asked the people to work on this and to come up with all kinds of ways to represent just 2 numbers. And in the end, I think he did it himself as well, and he wrote about it in a blog post. I think he came up with 47 ways to represent 2 numbers. So apparently, there's not a single way to represent a data set. You can do it in different ways.
Well, you can skin a cat different ways.
Yeah, and,
That's true.
And the bias also is, you see, when we work with our smallholder groups again, you know, they are ultra poor, and then you have medium poor, less poor. When we move a family from $1 a day to $3 a day, it's already a big jump. But very few people can represent that, you know,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I think that would be also
Okay, I'm going to go to the floor because I suddenly saw a lot of hands. Yeah, let's start with Oscar.
Thanks for a very exciting exchange. And I want to jump in with the power of data visualization also for making some comparisons, because that usually brings attention of people. And I've seen examples in which budgets for education are compared to budgets on weapons, right, or military expenditure, and really bringing the attention of people. But my comment actually is in the direction of against what we have heard this morning about the obituary of the PDF, because sometimes you use this data visualization in a very simple and easy to capture manner to bring the attention for some audience who might be interested in the full report, where you have the explanation of the distribution of the mean and all your analysis without oversimplifying your analysis. But that was an important interface to really bring the attention to what can be further explained in an evaluation report or a research study. Just wanted to hear your reactions to this cross-fertilization of media to support the information.
Okay, yes, and then we come to my UN Habitat colleague.
My name is Hansdeep Khaira, and I'm with the IFAD, Independent Office of Evaluation with the IFAD. So I like to think of the level of impactful visualization as something that is dictated by technology, whilst data distortion is something that is dictated by the designer. So if I use this as a hypothesis, then have advances in technology have they tipped the scales in favor of the impactful visualization and against data distortion, or is data distortion something that we will have to live with? Thank you.
Okay. Sir?
Basically, to me, we should use the graphing and pictures to make data be interpreted easily and more interesting. But if really graphing or pictures are going to distort the data, why graph? But what Oscar said now, that at times perhaps it is not to do with data, but to make someone get interested in reading the next data or make comparison. Many times I see the reports, you wonder, why this picture? But, oh, you say, maybe if it was not this picture, the report would be boring. So some of the times we put pictures and graphs, not having anything to do with data, but not make the report boring. I don't know, this is what I have been experiencing, but most of the data in the reports or pictures or graphs fine, but some of the pictures have nothing to do with data. It is to make as a Saturday for people to be interested in the report.
Okay, I think then your comment just dovetails with the obituary of PDF. So in order not to kill the PDF, we're going to add pictures. So who wants to take that? Because I feel very passionate about the PDFs. Yeah, Jan, go.
I think that creating visualizations just to make people interested in reading a report can be a valid reason to do so, actually. I just gave a presentation last week at a small seminar for people who were creating annual reports, and one of their complaints was that nobody reads those reports, and they were looking for ways to make it more interesting. And even though, well, I think a visualization can have multiple purposes. One is really to communicate, for instance, complex information, or to see patterns in data. But for me, at least, if you can create something that just looks nice, and if the result is that people start reading your report, and if that's what you want, then why not?
I think in our project also we are big consumers of what we call the case studies, you know? Because indeed the reports we are mostly administrative about how much money was spent. So if you want to know a bit more about the reality, we ask for case studies. And I'm amazed because projects are really innovating on that, you know, like beginning it was only one PDF document, then by adding the PowerPoint, they really were able to show more illustration of the work, pictures or graphs, real ones attached to the subject. But I saw some of them moving to video as well to show more the things, or moving to one-page summary which they can disseminate on Facebook. So that's why also I'm very much convinced that we are lucky to have so many tools nowadays, and we have to benefit of them, you know. And most of them are public tools now, so you can put your PowerPoint on SlideShare, documents on Google Maps also, etc. So I think it's quite interesting to use. And I guess there will be many innovations coming out of that to cross-analyze it among countries.
Elisabetta?
Yes, just a few words. What we have been saying, I think, has much to do with the capacity of people of focusing on something. And we have been talking these days about the possibility to show some graphs, some pictures of people working, and so on. We have been talking also about storytelling. That's the way to show something rather than just numbers, graphs, and so on. Why? Because in the end, if, for example, we talk about poor people and a way for fighting against hunger, or a way for improving the development, we can talk about numbers. And quite often numbers have no meaning for people, even for policy makers. So it seems it's better to give a different kind of idea, that is telling a story of a poor farmer, for example, whose life is changed due to a specific project. I think that we should find a way in between. Taking into consideration the impact of a project or a program, I think we have to take into consideration the fact that we need to evaluate the impact of the project or the program from a very solid statistical viewpoint and anyway scientific viewpoint. But then, meanwhile, we have to be able to communicate this idea, communicate this impact that we have evaluated. And in order to do that, I have realized during my work experience that it's certainly useful to associate to the number something that is very easy to communicate, that is the story of people. So I think we should find a good compromise between the need to give something empathic to people and something that is consistent, scientifically based, and developed and created on the basis of solid scientific basis.
Thank you for that. Benoit, you want to say
Yeah,
something?
to me this topic is so important because there is a gap to be closed, and I guess this workshop should help. But why didn't we progress more in M&E these past 20 years? If I compare it with accounting and auditing, they are far more advanced, you know, and it is as complex actually. But you have accounting software, you have all this type. And many software is just starting to show up for the past 6-7 years. So it's kind of, there was a level of priority and importance which was not well dealt with, and slowly we have to close that gap. But indeed, it's a super field of experience, I think, because with all the mixed of information we can bring it, and the new technologies, this can really bring to nice systems, I think.
I guess there's one thing, though. You know, I thought I was a technological determinist, but I've changed my mind. I'm not anymore. I believe, perhaps, Benoit, to your point, why accounting has progressed from a technological perspective and M&E has not, it's because M&E is about people. And you know, if we talk about putting people at the center of it, technology is just a tool. So, you know, there is that dilemma, there is that tension, and I'm not sure that, you know, it's going to be a black and white, you know, a black and white answer. With that, are there any burning questions? Yes, sir, and then the lady. Why don't we start with the lady in the back, since you're there, you don't have, just behind you, sweetie.
Hi, my name is Tina Torjman-Nebe. I'm from UNICEF's Evaluation Office. The session title was Impactful Visualization, and that really spoke to me because at the UNICEF Evaluation Office, and I think many colleagues too are in the same situation, we're asked now to measure uptake and impact of our evaluations, including the visualizations of the findings in the report. So my question to the panel is, how do we know that we're having an impact? And what kind of impact is it anyway? So currently, you know, we can look at web downloads, we can look at citation indices if our visualizations are published somewhere, but that doesn't go very far. We don't know what kind of impact it is that we're having. So if you could comment on measurement of impact of visualizations. Thank you.
Okay, that's a $1 million question. Sir.
Thank you. My name is Nee from the Permanent Representation of Ghana. Roxy, I couldn't agree more with you in terms of the comment that was made vis-a-vis the evolution or the advancement of accounting versus M&E. It's about people. It comes down to that. Accounting, auditing, those are about numbers. Now we're talking about people. And that brings me to a very important point. It was a question that was asked that I don't think we have really done justice to, the use of this visualization to feed back to farmers. And that is the crux of the matter. I've been working at field level, so sometimes you see the numbers, you see the graphs, you see the pie charts and all, but what do they really say? How can that farmer take that, take the real message out of that? I think that is what is key. And that brings us to the point that it's important for us to combine both, the technological aspects and also the human dimensions of what the technological aspects are. These data and the interpretation and all gives us an indication. But what is the real story? The real story are told by the people who have been part of this. And I think it is important that we take note of that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, so how do we measure impact?
It's a very good question, and you already gave some good suggestions, but I would also say that it can be hard to measure impact. One reason that I personally could think of is that visualization also comes very natural to us, because we as humans are very good at processing visual information. So you may not even be aware of the fact that you are or at least that your thoughts are being influenced by visualization, maybe, I don't know. But on the other hand, it's also, unless you don't define some kind of measures or things that you can measure, it may be hard to find the impact. At the beginning of my career, I actually asked a few clients of mine why they invested in me, because after all, they spent money on me to create a visualization. And I must admit that for some, it was actually quite hard to explain, because especially if you create visualizations for creating awareness or inform people about something that other than number of clicks or views or something like that, you don't really know how it has changed people. So it can, I really have to admit that it can be a very difficult thing to establish.
Elisabetta.
I think you're right. It's really very difficult to know that. Indeed, I'm much more interested in how the visualization can support in evaluating the impact of the programs, rather than trying to see if the result is due to a specific image or due to a specific way of telling the story. I don't think this is the crucial part.
Okay, Benoit?
Yeah, I think the main issue is always that, is what part of the impact is due to your activity or something else. But again, in projects, we try to make things really simple. You had a certain population at a certain stage, beginning of a project. How are they at the end of a project? Did their income improve? Did their livelihoods improve? That's the measure of impact. So of course, we have all a set of tools. We calculate the internal rate of return to see how was it at the before project and after project. We have outcome survey, which help to see as the wealth of a population increase, is the income increase as well. So all this can help. And then you have also many social tools, which then takes account people. I mean, when you discuss with people, and it's funny that generally, I always remember that when you ask women in the field, women generally answer, oh, I now manage to send my children to school and to give them good clothes. And that's on its own an excellent indicator of development. So yeah, there are many tools to measure this impact. Of course, the discussion will always be, is that impact due to a project? Or due because a big mine opened next door, a factory, or because government send a lot of subsidies? That you can go more in details. But at the end of the day, what's important is the development of the people. Now, about the learning aspect and feeding back to population, I think here again we have many possibilities, and the most efficient to me, beyond what I said already about non-connected tool, is the exchange among people. So we promote a lot in IFAD and elsewhere what we call the learning routes, which are study tool exchange. That can be done among farmers, can be done among government officials, or private sector representative, all type of people. And I want to remember as well what we were doing in Rwanda and Madagascar is what we do in our institution, the internship, but apprenticeships in farms, in small enterprise. And that was amazing because even a middle-aged farmer or going to a small enterprise, learning new techniques in few months' time, believe me, when he comes back, he really spread it very large. In Thailand, this system has been formalized for 50 years by the late king. They were selecting farmers, pilots, which were then funded by Ministry of Agriculture to teach others. And I met several of them. They call them Prak Chao Ban. And one of these guys, 65 years old, doing that for 30 years. So I asked him, how many people have you trained? He told me 50,000. I said, no, sir, come on, you're joking. So then he came back with all these books, 30 years of books. And he was showing me all the names of the people which went through. So there are also many of these systems which are quite impressive.
Great. And indeed, sorry,
Yeah, go ahead.
maybe it's difficult to isolate the specific impact of graphs or something like that on something that has been communicated concerning a specific program, because maybe people are attracted by the graph but then continue reading the report just because it's written in the proper way or because the title is written in an effective way and so on. So isolate the specific value added of the different methods and instruments you have used is extremely difficult to me.
Right.
They are correlated.
Okay, yes, last comment.
Yeah, also, final comment. I mentioned that it may be hard to determine the impact, but that doesn't mean that I dismiss the value of visualization, because with visualization you can communicate things that are otherwise very hard to communicate. Imagine that you want to describe a map in text, or looking at the table data of a network. That's a picture really is clear immediately. So it's not that visualization has no value, but it's in that sense a little bit hard to determine the impact.
We just gave some caveats, warnings.
Sure. No. And I think the biggest caveat warning is don't forget this is all about people. So it's not just about the tool and the technology. I think with that, I'll wrap up. I thank the panelists. Thank you for your questions and comments.